I said nothing because I didn't realize there was a difference between who we were and who would be allowed to be seen. Perfection is beautiful because it looks unbreakable, but glass also shines right before it shatters. It began on a Wednesday, the kind of middle-of-the-week day that looks harmless. We were preparing for a small influencer lunch. Handwritten place cards, soft linen, a mood board printed and pinned. I was finalizing vendor reconciliations when my phone buzzed with a bank alert, a login attempt at 2:13 a.m. from a device I didn't recognize. I told myself it was some automated sync, a harmless thing that happens when you live half your life online. I muted the notification and went back to folding menus. At the lunch, the light was perfect. Ria knows how to choose light. Even soup looks like a magazine photo near her. An influencer asked, "Who handles designs day to day?" Ria smiled and said, "We both do." Then added, almost laughing, "Though some of us are better with boxes and barcodes." People chuckled. It was a small, clean line. I kept smiling. Only later did I realize that in a family drama, the first cut is often disguised as charm. Back at the office, I borrowed Ria's iPad to airdrop some behind-the-scenes clips. A notification slid across the screen before I could stop it. Arjun, finance. Done. New ledger looks like her edits. You were right. Cleaner if it routes under her login. My thumb froze over the glass. I opened messages without thinking. The thread was short, efficient, impersonal. Ria's last text read, "Ria, use her access tonight. She leaves early. We need a clean trail if anyone asks." I scrolled up and found screenshots, columns I recognized from our vendor list, a new line item labeled Northline Media Retainer, and a note, "Bill under Ops sign-off." Ops, me. I told myself there had to be a practical reason. Maybe Arjun needed my authorization for a late payment. Maybe the wording only sounded wrong. I returned the iPad to her desk, carefully, like it might burn me if I held it too long. In my office, I logged into the admin console and checked activity. My account showed edits at 2:13 a.m. on a file I had never opened from an IP that matched the building where Ria lived. I could taste cold metal at the back of my tongue. I closed the laptop, stood up, sat down, and then did what I have always done. I rationalized. That night, I asked Ria in the calmest voice I could manage, "Did you need to use my login? I got a strange alert." She didn't look up from her phone. "Probably," she said lightly. "You left your laptop open. I had to send a PO quickly. Investors want a new media push." She came over, kissed my cheek. "Relax, we're on the same team." The kiss landed soft and steady, like a period at the end of a sentence I didn't understand. At dinner, my father praised a burst in pre-orders. Ria made a toast, smiling at me across the table. "Some of us aren't built for pressure," she said, gentle as a lullaby. "And that's okay. I'll handle the tough rooms." My mother frowned, but no one argued. The rice tasted damp. Conversation moved on. I wanted to slip away and count every lock in the house. 2 days later, an envelope arrived from a law firm I didn't recognize. Thin paper, heavy ink. Inside was a notice acknowledging an application to register Ivory and Thread under a single proprietor, Ria. I read it twice. The date on the form was last week. There was a box for corrections if filed in error. I carried the letter to her, tried to keep my voice level. "Is this a mistake?" She scanned it, then smiled like she found a typo in a menu. "My bad," she said, sliding the paper back. "I asked for a template to review, and it must have gone in as a draft filing. I'll fix it." She reached for my wrist. "You trust me, right?" I nodded, because love makes you agree to things your brain does not. On Friday morning, our investor call started with small talk and ended with a punch. Ria shared a projection deck I hadn't seen. The org chart on slide 4 showed a single CEO and no operations lead. My name appeared once. Advisory, part-time. I blinked at the screen, wide awake now. The investor asked, "What's the change?" Ria said, casual. We're streamlining. My sister wants to explore a course abroad and take a step back. There was silence in my mouth and static in my ears. After the call in the corridor, I whispered, "Why would you say that?" She tucked a strand of hair, not meeting my eyes. Optics. Investors like one voice. You're still my right hand. Don't make this bigger than it is. When you love someone, you will build bridges out of smoke to keep walking towards them. I told myself she was protecting the company, protecting us. That evening, I ordered takeout, ate from the container at my desk, and took notes about courier delays like the world was still ordinary. On the whiteboard, I wrote, "Keep the machine clean." It felt like a spell. The next small thing was not small. I arrived early on Monday to prep for a cash flow review. The printer was humming, spitting out sheets I hadn't queued. I picked up the warm pages. It was an email draft from my account to Arjun. Please authorize the retainer for Northline Media as per Ria's verbal approval. Signing on behalf of Ops. My name. The send later stamp showed 9 a.m., 3 minutes from now. I checked my outbox. There it was. Scheduled, tidy, inevitable. The signature was mine. The phrasing was almost mine. I unscheduled it and sat very still, holding the paper as if it could tell me whose hands had instructed it. I walked to Ria's office and stood at the door. She looked up, assessing the weather of my face. "What?" she said softly. I held up the printout without stepping in. "This was cued from my account," I said. "Please don't do that." She tilted her head like I was a new kind of bird. "I didn't," she said. "Maybe you forgot. You've been exhausted." When I didn't reply, she stood, came close enough that the fabric of her blouse brushed my arm, and lowered her voice. "You're taking everything too personally. It's business. I'm handling momentum. Trust me to do what you're not built to." The words wore satin gloves, but they hit like stone. I changed my passwords that morning. I turned on 2-factor authentication for everything and set recovery codes on paper. I told myself it was simply good hygiene. I did not use the word fear. Fear felt too dramatic for a quiet office with plants and a diffuser that smelled like eucalyptus. I kept working. That's the thing about an emotional story in a real-life story like ours. Until the ground splits, you still put one foot ahead of the other. Later that week, a client wrote to say a confidential lookbook we'd sent had been forwarded from my email to a competitor's generic account. I stared at the forwarded chain. It had happened at 2:19 a.m. The IP location matched the same one from the bank alert. I called the client, voice steady, throat dry, and apologized for a technical breach that we were reviewing with IT. After I hung up, I walked to the bathroom, locked the door, and leaned my forehead against the cool mirror. My phone buzzed. "Ria, don't spiral. I'll handle PR. Focus on deliveries." I went home early and found my mother in the kitchen, slicing fruit. She looked up like she saw a storm I hadn't spoken of. "You work too hard," she murmured. I wanted to say, "I think your eldest daughter is moving furniture in the house while I sleep." I wanted to say, "I think a shape is forming with my name sewn into it, and I am the only one who can see it." Instead, I said, "I'm fine," because that is what you say when you are not. The first undeniable act came wrapped in politeness. Saturday afternoon, Ria knocked on my door holding 2 mugs of tea. "Saturday morning meeting," she said, passing me one. "Let's be aligned." We sat at my desk. She opened her laptop and walked me through a tidy plan. Consolidate leadership, externalize operations to a partner, allocate PR spends to Northline Media to keep pace with growth. Short-term pain, long-term brand safety. I pointed to the vendor name. "Who are they?" She blinked once, slow. "A boutique I'm testing. You'll like them." I watched her face, waiting for a flicker. There was none. That evening, when she left, I opened the folder where I keep the old things that still matter. Childhood photos, the first invoice we ever printed, the pen my father gave us. The pen lay in its case, heavy, honest. I took it out and held it. A thought arrived in my head with the clarity of a bell. She is building a story where I am the problem. It was not a feeling, it was a sentence. It landed and everything shifted around it. I did not sleep. At 3 a.m., I opened my email to draft a timeline of oddities. The bank alert, the forwarding, the scheduled message, the trademark filing. I attached screenshots, dates, IP logs. I wrote, "If I am wrong, I will be relieved. If I am right, I need proof." The house was silent, the kind deep quiet that makes your own breathing sound like thunder. On Sunday morning, we were leaving for a supplier visit when Ria said, almost lazily, "By the way, if investors ask about your access, tell them you've been stepping back from approvals. It's cleaner." I looked at her, the sun bright on her cheek, and wondered how long she had practiced that line. "Why would I say that?" I asked. She smiled, a soft, perfect curve. "It's true," she whispered. "Isn't it?" The kettle clicked off in the kitchen. Somewhere a car horn called and stopped. I set my cup down carefully so it wouldn't rattle. That was the moment. Not the document, not the email, not the alert at 2:13 a.m. It was that soft question, heavy with certainty, turning my history into an alibi for her plan. A thin thread inside me snapped, quiet, final. I looked at my sister and knew I could not put my name in her hands again.
The boardroom smelled like new leather and lemon polish, the kind of clean that pretends nothing ever happens there, except reason. Monday began with water bottles aligned like soldiers and a stack of printed decks that I had not approved. Ria sat at the head, hair pinned with a pearl clip she wore on careful days. I took a seat one place to her left, the old habit of deference I hadn't noticed until that second. The projector hummed. Our investor's face appeared on the wall with a polite delay. Ria cleared her throat and said, "Let's talk structure." It sounded practical. It was anything but. Slide 2 announced a temporary consolidation. Slide 4 removed my role. Slide 6 showed an outsourced operations partner and a PR budget that doubled without cost offsets. I raised my hand like a schoolchild and asked, "Where's the impact analysis?" Ria smiled as if I were adorable and replied, "Already modeled," then clicked to a sheet I'd never seen. My name footnoted as consulting. The investor nodded, said something about clarity in leadership, and moved on. In the polite applause that followed, I felt the table under my palms turn cold. My father tried to interject, "Let's discuss timeline." But the timeline had already been discussed somewhere else, without me, in a room where I was a topic, not a participant. After the call, our HR manager, Asha, knocked on my glass door. Her eyes were kind and tired, the way eyes look when they've been told not to look directly at something. "Can we chat?" she asked, and then closed the door. "Just for a few weeks," she murmured, sliding a paper across my desk. "Wellness leave" was typed at the top. "There's chatter," she added, choosing each word like it might cut her tongue. "About boundaries and burnout. This protects you." I stared at the form. "Who is it protecting me from?" I asked. Asha's lashes trembled. "From talk," she whispered. "From optics." She left before my thanks could turn into anything that would embarrass us both. I didn't sign. Instead, I walked the floor, said hello to the sampling team, fixed a mis-shelved rack that had always bothered me. Small order in a large storm. When I returned to my desk, my inbox had rearranged itself. Threads I was on yesterday were archived. Calendar invites disappeared and reappeared with me as optional. Slack channels I used for vendor coordination now showed a padlock and a message,
You do not have permission. I pinged IT. They said the changes came from leadership. I typed, deleted, and typed again. Please restore access pending review. The ticket marked itself as resolved with a line that read, per directive from RIA. I sat very still, smelling the eucalyptus from the diffuser, and knew I had become a guest in my own house. The first escalation arrived wrapped in policy. A courier delivered a letter from a compliance firm we hired last quarter to professionalize risk. The letter alleged a breach of confidentiality tied to my email forwarding a lookbook externally. It advised temporary suspension of my approvals until a fact-finding exercise concludes. The letter was correct on data and wrong on truth. My hands shook so badly I had to put the paper down and count to 10 like a child learning to breathe through a stitch. I walked to Ria's office and held the letter at the corner like it might stain me if I touched it fully. I said quietly, "Fix this." She read fast, then set the letter down and looked at me with an expression I couldn't name. "This breaks my heart," she said, voice low, eyes glistening. "How did we get here?" The way she said "we" sounded like mercy and felt like a trap. I went to my parents that evening. My father had the compliance letter folded twice, the crease worn white. He didn't raise his voice. That is how I knew he was truly frightened. "Tell me this is all a misunderstanding," he said, his thumb worrying the edge of the paper. My mother brought tea, no one drank. I explained the IP logs, the 2:13 a.m. alerts, the scheduled email that wasn't mine. My father listened, face unreadable. Then he asked the question that pressed me into a smaller shape. "Why would your sister do this?" I said I didn't know. He nodded slowly, as if I just confirmed the weather. He said, "Until this is sorted, stay away from approvals. Let RIA talk to the investor." My mother touched my wrist and whispered, "For a few days." I left their room carrying my own shadow like luggage. The next morning, I learned what it means to vanish without leaving the building. The security guard, who always saluted, suddenly asked to see my ID, twice. The receptionist smiled too wide and too slow. The junior designer who used to run to me with questions now looked at her shoes until I passed. People don't have to say anything to make you disappear. They can simply wait for you to fade. I did not fade. I began to document. I created a clean folder on a personal drive, far from company systems. I uploaded the bank alert screenshot, the IP trace, the send later draft, the trademark notice. I recorded the date, time, and person present for each oddity. I took photos of the whiteboard where someone had erased my name from weekly stand-ups. I backed up my call logs. I wrote down how Asha's hand trembled. Evidence has no temperature, but it can warm you enough to stop shaking. On Thursday, I took a cab to the courier hub to troubleshoot delays I could no longer view on our dashboard. The cab smelled like coconut oil and dust. Outside, the air was hot and slow. Inside, I learned 3 shipments were rerouted last minute under a priority pick authorization sent from my work email. The reroute increased costs by 30% and delayed delivery by 2 days. The clerk showed me the code. It matched a sequence only leadership knew. "Who sent this?" I asked. The clerk shrugged. "Came from